Adelante.
Muy buenos días a todas y todos. Esta es una sesión híbrida del Consejo, una sesión especial híbrida del Consejo Permanente. Tenemos a delegaciones aquí en el Salón de las Américas y delegaciones conectadas en línea. Entre estos dos grupos tenemos las siguientes delegaciones participando: Antigua y Barbuda, Bahamas, Belice, Bolivia, Brasil, Canadá, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, the Commonwealth of Dominica, Ecuador, El Salvador, Estados Unidos de América, Grenada, Guatemala, Guyana, Haití, Honduras, Jamaica, México, Paraguay, Perú, República Dominicana, Saint Kitts y Nevis, Santa Lucía, San Vicente y las Grenadinas, Surinam, Trinidad y Tobago y Uruguay. Tenemos quórum, presidente.
Muy bien, gracias, Néstor. Buenos días. Entonces, verificado el quórum, declaro abierta la sesión extraordinaria del Consejo Permanente, que ha sido convocada con el fin de considerar los temas de carácter urgente de la Comisión de Asuntos Administrativos y Presupuestarios. Estimados colegas, de conformidad con lo dispuesto en el artículo 43 del reglamento, someto a la consideración del Consejo Permanente el proyecto del orden del día contenido en el documento CP/OD 2428/23. De no haber observaciones, lo damos por aprobado. Corresponde a continuación la consideración del proyecto de resolución, abro comillas, apropiación extraordinaria para cubrir gastos relacionados con la celebración del 53º periodo ordinario de sesiones de la Asamblea General, cierra comillas, acordado por la CAP en su reunión celebrada ayer 11 de mayo de referéndum de las delegaciones de Colombia y México y que ha sido elevado a la consideración de este Consejo Permanente como documento CAPP 3903/23, revisión 2. Consulto entonces, en primer lugar, a las delegaciones de Colombia y México si están en condiciones de levantar su ad referéndum sobre el proyecto de resolución a consideración. No estoy teniendo respuesta, no sé si es que estoy en estado de México. Ahí está. México, doña Luz Elena Baños tiene la palabra.
Gracias, presidente. México sí quiere dejar sentado que nos parece que si estamos en un clima de austeridad, ese tipo de gastos no son prioritarios y debiéramos de dar una muestra de que no solo los estados tienen obligaciones y responsabilidades, sino también los funcionarios de la organización. No hemos encontrado ni en esta ni en ninguna otra propuesta ninguna apertura. Y es que esto es un poquito y el otro punto es otro poquito y 20 puntos son poquitos y vamos juntando hasta hacer miles y millones de dólares. No es el asunto del refrigerio, no es el asunto del desayuno, no es el asunto de las cuotas por el trabajo extra, es la actitud en sí y eso México lo quiere dejar sentado. Es lo mínimo que podemos hacer los estados para velar porque el ejercicio presupuestal sea el adecuado. Tenemos una administración en la organización que es muy costosa y la pagamos cada año y les facilitamos la compra de aparatos para trabajar en sus casas sin que nos enteremos, para poner plataformas, para manejar los números, etcétera, y a eso le damos una prioridad y gastamos millones en eso y no hay ninguna expresión de corresponsabilidad con el clima de austeridad que debiéramos de tener. Quizá no todos los países están en esa situación y tienen una situación financiera muy sana, pero creo que dentro de la organización tendríamos que expresar una corresponsabilidad básica del tipo de gastos. Entonces, puede pasar nuestra observación de hoy y unirnos al consenso. Sin embargo, sí queremos dejar expresado que no nos parece la mejor manera de actuar, porque son cosas que sí es posible quitar. No tenemos por qué ofrecer refrigerios gratuitos a todas las personas que vienen. Las personas tienen sus viáticos para venir, no necesitan eso y a lo mejor es un gasto innecesario, pero no lo han querido quitar, lo hemos insistido y pedimos que lo quitaran antes de venir acá y no lo han hecho. Entonces, sí, solo queremos dejar sentado la falta de voluntad y la falta de corresponsabilidad y de conciencia del momento de austeridad que debiéramos vivir y que no hay una expresión mínima de la conciencia de lo que estamos viviendo, sino más bien una presión muy fuerte sobre los estados para hacernos sentir irresponsables y con falta de generosidad. Pero esa no es la posición de México. Damos muchos millones de nuestro presupuesto público, de los impuestos de nuestra gente. Por eso pedimos cuentas, porque no es el presupuesto de nadie de nosotros en particular, son los impuestos de nuestro pueblo. Y esos hay que rendir cuentas como rendimos todo en el sector público. Gracias, presidente.
Gracias a usted, embajadora. Bien, de no haber más expresiones, entonces vamos a dejar la nota al pie de página en relación a lo que manifiesta. Colombia está pidiendo la palabra. Adelante, Colombia.
Gracias, señor presidente. La delegación de Colombia también tenía en el referéndum este documento. Quisiera también mencionar que mi país no se opondrá al consenso. Sin embargo, creemos que se trata de un presupuesto bastante oneroso que no corresponde con la situación financiera de la organización. No quiero repetir lo que ya mencionó la embajadora de México, pero mi país coincide plenamente con sus observaciones. Muchas gracias.
Le consulto a México, ¿desea que sea una nota a pie de página o quiere que se tome nota? Hago lo que usted entienda pertinente.
Decidiré, presidente, gracias por consultar. Lo que decidamos, así se lo informaremos.
Muy gentil. Entonces, no habiendo más solicitudes al respecto en torno a este punto, el proyecto Apropiación Extraordinaria para cubrir los gastos relacionados con la celebración del 53º periodo ordinario de las sesiones de la Asamblea General, contenido en el documento CAP 3903/23, revisión 2, queda aprobado. Muy bien. Pasamos como siguiente punto del orden del día la consideración de la solicitud del presidente de la CAP para brindarnos un informe sobre los avances en los trabajos de esta comisión en relación al proceso presupuestario y negociaciones en torno al nivel global y tope de ejecución presupuestaria, de acuerdo con el documento distribuido como documento CP/INF 9745/23. Tiene la palabra el presidente de la CAP.
Good morning, Chair, and good morning, colleagues. Chair, Excellencies, at this stage, the Council and the esteemed members are cognizant of Article 96 of the General Standards, which directs that the Secretary General shall submit the proposed program budget to the preparatory committee and send a copy to the Chair of SEDI together with a litany of other items, 10 other items, A through J. These prerequisites and requisites must be attained and concluded at least 90 days before the opening date of the General Assembly. Please note that the General Assembly is scheduled to convene on June 21st, 2023, a short 40 days from today's proceedings. This invariably places the current mandate significantly past due. That is, the statutory deadline for the presentation of the 2023-2024 budget was March 23rd, 2023. As we are abundantly aware, the Permanent Council has approved 2 extensions for the CAP to make a decision regarding the budget ceiling. Please note that the first extension was granted on April 20th, 2023 for a period up to April 28th, 2023. A second extension was granted on May 3rd, 2023, for a period to expire May 10th, 2023. Accordingly, the former extension, which was afforded, has since expired. Excellencies, esteemed colleagues, by way of full disclosure and communication to this Council of all facts and circumstances, the Chair acknowledges and hereby informs the Council of a note that was transmitted by the delegation of Argentina, apparently at the behest of an entity identified therein as Group 10. Further, in illustration of utmost transparency, the correspondence from the delegation of Argentina and the response from the Chair related thereto will be tendered to this Council for its records. With the permission and kind indulgence of the Council, given the importance and required focus on the budget preparation process, I will address the ancillary matter of the correspondences at the conclusion of this status update. Please. By way of status update, Excellencies, esteemed colleagues, to date the CAP has held 16 formal and informal meetings, including 2 informal sessions. Consequent to the Council's most recent extension, negotiations in the CAP reconvened the very next day on May 4th, and additionally May 8th and May 10th, followed by a formal meeting which was held yesterday on May 11th, 2023. The deliberations focused on primarily 3 scenarios, and I will ask the Secretariat if we're in a position to present those scenarios, one of which was augmented by an inclusion by the delegation of the United States. The 3 scenarios that were being considered and have been considered over the last 6 to 8 weeks, with an inclusion now are as follows. Scenario 1, which was enlisted by the delegation of Mexico. Scenario 1B, which was enlisted by the delegation Chile. And the Chair's updated proposal 2C, which was complemented by an inclusion by the delegation of the United States. By elaboration and reminder, and for the records, the scenarios are as follows. Scenario 1 is a 0 nominal growth proposal which freezes the budget levels at the 2023 budget ceiling of US $82.8 million. Given that this scenario does not account for expected cost of living adjustment and inflation, selection of this option will require significant administrative and programmatic and/or other strategic prioritization and/or identification of other income sources or savings. More importantly, it is more than probable that Scenario 1 will require significant reductions in staff to the scale of approximately 50 staff members or 15% staff cuts. Scenario 1B, which is a 0 nominal growth proposal that is similar to Scenario 1, keeps in place the 2023 budget ceiling of US $82.8 million, but proposes to add $1 million to fund an external third-party comprehensive review of the organization. The total budget ceiling would thus be $83.8 million. Similarly, given that this scenario does not account for expected cost of living adjustment or inflation, selection of this option will require significant administrative and programmatic and/or other strategic prioritization and/or identification of other sources of income or savings. More importantly, it is more than probable that Scenario 1 will require significant reductions in staffing to the scale of approximately 50 staff members or 15% staff cuts. The Chair's updated proposal. The Chair's proposal, which is identified as 2C, proposes an overall budget level of $92.7 million with a quota scale of 92.1 excluding the delegation of Cuba, and a budget execution ceiling of $90.4 million, 2.3 which accounts for expected non-payment of member states who are leaving or who no longer consider themselves as members of the organization. Accordingly, the salient features of the Chair proposal are as follows. Provides the mandatory cost of living adjustments, increases overall quota obligations in comparison to Scenario 1, increases budget expenditure ceiling in comparison to Scenario 1, includes funding to the external third-party comprehensive organizational and operational review, which will be sourced from the Indirect Cost Recovery Reserve, and it's consistent with the ICR policy. It also includes financing for the European Union Pillar Assessment and Enhancement Program Management Oversight, and that also appropriates resources from the ICRR, which is also consistent with the ICRR policy. It includes a regular fund for the stabilization and preservation of the OAS health insurance at 10% versus the proposal, which was 6%. And this proposal, based on the estimates from staff, will not require staff reductions. The inclusion by the United States proposes to address the concerns which were expressed by some member states regarding the scale of percentage increase in quota they may face as a result of the unfreezing of the quota methodology and the desire by a majority of member states that there will not be a real budget cut to the organization next year. The new proposal that was included by the United States, details as follows, and I stand to be corrected because the United States isn't here and they can elaborate further if I miss anything. The scenario assumes the elements of 2C as a target to be set for the overall budget ceiling. Any member with an increase in their assessment percentage resulting from the ending of the freeze would receive a credit equal to the full amount of their assessment increase to go from scenario 1 to scenario 2, or $200,000 in credits, whichever is less, upon payment of the 2024 assessment, less the calculated credit. It may be warranted to inform that during the recent period of negotiations, a plethora of information that was requested by member states that was either outstanding or was pending release was furnished by the General Secretariat to the member states. It is therefore anticipated that with the production of the requested information, those member states that preconditioned their considerations on its receipt can expedite their budget-related decisions. To be clear, I, as the chair of CAP, and I believe all member states, are in solidarity with the view that we as member states are deserving to receive responses in a reasonable time and in fullness. Requests for information, and those requests for information are required to guide our deliberations. We note that the Secretariat for Administration and Finance and the broader Secretariat do have human resource constraints, largely due to the decisions we have taken as member states to impose austerity on the organization over several years. But we look forward to the continued and respectful collaboration with the Secretariat going forward to meet our shared goals of a proper stewardship of the organization. Additionally, commitments have been made by several delegations to submit in written presentations their respective proposals or counter-proposals. The committee therefore looks forward to enhanced development given the foregoing commitments. Excellencies, esteemed colleagues, in summation, notwithstanding the ongoing discussions and negotiations and iterations that proposals will be forthcoming, as it stands, the CAP, and by extensions, member states have not arrived at a unanimous nor consensus decision to present to the Permanent Council today in respect of a derivation of a budget ceiling for the OAS regular fund for the period 2024. Chair, having presented to this Council the status report of CAP, it may be useful to offer clarifications as to the necessity of convening this special Permanent Council in the first instance. Further, there is the matter of addressing the correspondence which was received by the Chair from the delegation of Argentina in its capacity as coordinator. The response to both queries are co-related. Firstly, regarding the correspondence which was received from the delegation of Argentina, the Chair makes every effort to be inclusive and welcomes input from all member states and relevant stakeholders. The Chair sought a legal review and an official response was offered and has been tendered. Notably, the correspondence itself offered views but did not articulate in precise terms a request, and it was ambiguous in the sense of identifying an endpoint or a destination. The Chair hails from a region, a culture, and a well-honed training and tradition which encourages and prides itself on maintenance of discipline and the adherence to good procedural and legal order. More importantly, this Chair is neither inclined nor imbued with the ability to arrogate unto itself by fiat or by self-design the authority that exceeds its remit. Having regard to the expiration of the extension of the mandate, which was granted by the Permanent Council on May 3rd, 2023, which concluded on May 10th, as chair of CAP, a subordinate advisory body to the Permanent Council, I am therefore compelled and duty-bound to provide an update, offer advice, and seek further directives or instructions from the Permanent Council or otherwise. Article 19B prescribes such. Please be advised that the chair nor CAP cannot extend its own writ. The Permanent Council is the basis of authority. From whence I came, so shall I return. In fact, the return date was May 11th, 2023. For further clarity, to offer an answer to a question that was posed, and it was a very valid question, and I welcome such inquisitions, was posed last evening as to whether the chair could have canceled today's Permanent Council meeting. The simple response is an emphatic yes, and affirmative. However, a fulsome reply would reveal that the chair and CAP would not be in compliance with the writ issued by the Permanent Council, which concluded on May 10th, 2023. If the suggestion is to continue outside of that remit, that's not the prerogative nor the practice of this chair. Excellencies and colleagues, as a collective, we have been working diligently to develop a viable solution that addresses the concerns and priorities of all member states. And we are confident that we are nearing a definitive outcome. Per Article 19B of the Rules of Procedure, it is up to the member states to decide how we proceed, whether it is prudent to continue our work without limits or to seek to continue our engagement in a fulsome manner, but with some time constraints, given the short runway before us to the General Assembly and the ability or inability of the General Secretariat to produce the documents and the necessary inputs. We would seek to maintain some fidelity with obligations laid out in the statutes. We should therefore set and govern ourselves by rules. In order to ensure the thoroughness and effectiveness of the process, it is respectfully requested that the Permanent Council grant the CAP an additional 7 calendar days extension for presentation of a proposal for the budget seating to the Permanent Council on May 19th, 2023. This additional time will allow CAP to ensure that all relevant factors have been taken into account. Further, the extension will also enable those member states that are formulating proposals and/or require official authorization in order to conclude related processes to do so. Chair Excellencies, this will be the third and final extension. Thus, by way of advance notice, please be comforted that on the occasion of the presentation of the Permanent Council, where this budget ceiling will be considered, a decision will be sought. We trust by consensus, or if deemed necessary, through the democratic exercise of Article 58 of the Rules of Procedure of the Permanent Council. We appreciate your understanding, continued collaboration, and support as we work together to achieve a mutually beneficial outcome for all involved. Thank you very much.
Yo le agradezco mucho, presidente de la CAP, sus palabras. Igual me gustaría dejar una pequeña constancia y un mecanismo distinto por si en 7 días estamos en esta misma circunstancia. El tiempo de todos es sagrado, caro, preciso y necesario. Entonces, si en 7 días no llegamos a tener punto de encuentro, me parece un acto poco prudente volvernos a convocar para mirarnos las caras y entrar en un loop en donde efectivamente no entramos en un punto de convergencia. Entonces, bienvenida sea la información, bienvenida sea la actualización, pero podríamos dejar precisado que si en 7 días no tenemos un punto de coincidencia y no hemos llegado a una solución, quizás por vía de la misiva electrónica podríamos eventualmente tener una dilatoria al respecto. Digo porque convocarnos para dentro de 7 días, mirarnos de vuelta y no tener una solución final, me da la impresión de que es un ejercicio desgastante, que nos erosiona, nos fricciona y no conduce a nada que sea demasiado bueno. Entonces, concluyo y coadyuvo al pensamiento del presidente de la CAP. Bienvenida a la información, bienvenida a la actualización. Si en 7 días, 6 días, 5 días tenemos una zona de entendimiento, estaría espléndido convocarnos y avanzar con el desierto de los tártaros hacia adelante. Ahora, si de lo contrario no es así, da toda la impresión de que no es lo más inteligente convocarnos nuevamente para mirarnos las caras y no entrar a una conclusión. Lo dejo como una postilla para que el cuerpo medite. Tiene la palabra Chile.
Gracias, presidente. Permítame agregar un adjetivo. No solo es desgastante y estéril este esfuerzo, sino además es caro. Una sesión de Consejo Permanente es cara para la organización. No tiene ningún sentido el ejercicio que estamos haciendo, que daña aún más las finanzas que estamos trabajando para generarle salud, para que sea la organización vívida que necesitamos. Gracias, presidente.
Gracias a usted. Antigua y barbuda, Sir Ronald Sanders, tiene la palabra.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, look, I'm very concerned about the way in which this entire process has been handled in trying to reach a budget ceiling so that the Secretariat can get down to the work of actually producing a budget in time for the General Conference with all of the necessary documentation that is required. That's not an easy task, and we are cutting this time down more and more. Now, what does this all boil down to? It boils down, frankly, to this. Do we believe this organization is worth paying for? Do we believe that its work benefits us or not? If there are some member countries here who do not believe the organization is useful and therefore do not want to pay for it, then sadly they have an option. And that option is not to stay in it. Those of us who feel that it is valuable and plays a role for each of our countries have to decide whether we wish to make the commitment to keep it going. Now, the Organization of American States has been here since 1948, for as long as I've been alive, in fact, my entire lifetime. The work that it has done in terms of democracy and human rights, and even in the matter of security, less so on development. But that work has been valuable. And we value it for this reason. Apart from what we can do collectively in this organization, I've said this before, Chairman, and I'll say it again. It is one of the cheapest tools of foreign policy execution available to each of our nations. Because there are 32 of us in here, still counting Nicaragua, and we are able, as ambassadors of our countries, to rub shoulders with each other, to talk to one another, even about bilateral matters. We do not have to have embassies in everybody's country because we have access to our ambassadorial colleagues in this organization. That's a value we couldn't pay for, because to replicate it would mean that we would have to set up embassies all over the place. There are several ambassadors in here who are bilateral ambassadors too. For instance, the ambassador of Panama is also accredited to my country, and I think that is a good thing. But the point I'm making here is this. We're penny pinching. We're talking about not paying for breakfast for Sika and CARICOM. Well, frankly, I could go to Secretary General's breakfast and quite happily not have the breakfast. In fact, when I have been to breakfast in the past, I've avoided it. So, why are we penny pinching? Why are we talking about thousands when millions are really what is at stake? This is a $115 million organization to run if it is to be run properly, and if it is to do its job, and if it is to keep the staff that we have who are good. This place has now become a transit point for people on their way to somewhere else. It's almost like a refugee center. This has all got to stop. If we mean for this organization to be something, let's stop the politics, because it's politics we're hearing. It's not economics, it's not finance. 2 and 2 in this place doesn't add up to 4, it adds up to 9 or 10 or whatever else somebody wants it to be. It's not scientific. But we have a political decision to make. And it's easy to say we shouldn't come back here as a permanent council to discuss this, and I agree with that. But why do we come to the permanent council? We come to the permanent council because people go to the CAP without the capacity to make decisions, or they go there to filibuster and to delay decision making and to make excuses. All of that tells me that there's very little regard for the OAS amongst many of our member states. Now, before I finish, let me just say this proposal from the United States is not a novel idea. Every time we run into a problem with the budget, we steal the money from the sub-fund. We go there for everything. Now, if I were a donor and I was giving you money and you were taking a portion of that to put into a sub-fund for specific purposes, like maintaining this building and other things, that you're using it merely for budgetary support, I'd stop giving you the money. Because that's not a very effective use of people's money. Now, we either have to decide this is our organization, we're responsible for it, or we're not. But this cannot continue. And if people would go to the CAP meeting determined to make a positive decision, we wouldn't have to come back to the Permanent Council. We are coming back here because people are filibustering, and they must take responsibility for that. Now, the chairs and the SAF Secretariat have bent over backwards to provide us all sorts of scenarios. Most of them are inadequate to the needs of this place. The original Scenario 1, Scenario 1 does not even take account of inflation over the last 10 years in the United States. The last quota increase we had was 7 years ago. It does not even take account of that. If we had taken account of that, the scenario I had presented to the CAP for $100 million would just have been met. Just. So let us face it. We are nickeling and diming over an organization we all know in our consciences is under-resourced, underfunded, and does not have enough resources to do what it has to do. And the decision we are making can't be about money, cannot possibly be about money. It has to do with politics. And so it is the political will that we have to summon. And that political will has to be based on whether the member states of this organization believe it is useful or not. Now, my country happens to believe it is useful, even though we probably derive the least benefit from it. But its benefit is not in terms of what we get as scholarships or as education and all of that, while all of those things are useful. Its principal benefit is that we can sit in this room together as equals, deal with the problems of our hemisphere, and try to arrive at a collective and reasonable way to take it forward. That is its importance. And that is what we have to recognize has to be paid for if we want this organization to be something. Thank you, Chair.
Gracias a usted. Sigue abierta la sesión. Tienen uso de la palabra los representantes que así lo entiendan pertinente. Argentina me está pidiendo la palabra.
Muy breve, presidente. Simplemente para que el debate siga en la comisión como ha propuesto el presidente y demos por cumplido el cometido de este Consejo Permanente.
Totalmente de acuerdo con usted, pero vuelvo a insistir en lo que solicité al cuerpo. Le pido al cuerpo que lo reflexione. Si en 7 días, aprobada la extensión de la CAP. Estamos en la misma situación. Me parece que es de orden que a través de los correos electrónicos y la voluntad colectiva se produzca una extensión y no volvamos a convocarnos en este espacio por las razones que argumentó tanto usted como Chile. ¿Estaríamos de acuerdo en ese talante? Le solicito al cuerpo esta información porque luego alguien podría decir, bueno, no se convocó al Consejo y se sigue prorrogando el plazo. En fin, entonces, de no haber objeciones, ¿quién está pidiendo la palabra? Estados Unidos, adelante.
Thank you, Chair. I agree that this body should not become a duplicate for the CAP, so I'll be brief, but I did want to speak since Ambassador Nimor, in his remarks, characterized the U.S. Proposal and asked for confirmation that he was doing so correctly, and he was. I thought that was a very correct and concise summary of the proposal that the U.S. put on the table. I do just want to clarify one point, which Ambassador Nimor said correctly, but I have heard talk that makes me believe this is worth clarifying, that the additional credit that we are proposing would come from the ICR fund and not from reserves. I understand there are side conversations about getting us to a consensus somehow by drawing into reserves, and I just want to make it clear the United States would have grave concerns about that for the pretty obvious reason that the reserves pot is already empty, in fact negative, and has been for several years. And the Audit Committee made the point in its recent report that it is to the detriment of the financial health of this situation that those reserves remain negative. And so further exacerbating that weakness of the organization to pass a budget is something that we would view with great concern. Again, I know that that hasn't been formally proposed yet, but I just want to make sure that it's clear to everyone the United States is not proposing drawing from reserves, but rather taking a small credit from ICR to get us over this difficult situation in which this year many countries have to pay a bit more because of the unfreezing of the data. Thanks.
Bien. En consecuencia, si no hay más solicitud de uso de la palabra, vamos a dar por aprobada la extensión de la CAP, para que defina el nivel presupuestario global del tope presupuestario del programa presupuestario para el 2024, en base a las intervenciones. Si no les parece mal, quedamos en esta conexión y damos por concluida la sesión extraordinaria. A ver. Si no me los ponen en la pantalla, capacidad telepática no voy a poder tener. Así que digo, cuando me los pongan en la pantalla, no concluyo nada porque hay solicitud de intervenciones. Adelante, Costa Rica.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Buenos días a todos. Mi intención era hablar después de que se aprobara la prórroga, señor presidente, y concuerdo perfectamente con su consulta, con su llamado al cuerpo de que no nos reunamos para hacerlo en persona, porque esto implica un gran costo en las finanzas, sino que más bien podamos circular la prórroga por escrito. Mi delegación desea hacer una intervención con respecto al punto de agenda de la sesión de hoy. Somos testigos de que la región atraviesa por una crisis económica y es en esta misma crisis la que a algunos estados le imposibilita cumplir con el pago oportuno de sus cuotas y no la falta de compromiso. Costa Rica no escapa a una crisis fiscal aguda y aún así ha cumplido con sus cuotas cabalmente. Precisamente, señor presidente, quisiera informar a los estados miembros que justo hace unos días nuestro país honró sus cuotas del año en curso. Nuestro país reconoce la difícil tarea que se presenta para todos en el dar seguimiento a las prioridades de la membresía con recursos tan limitados. Sin embargo, es necesario un esfuerzo de corresponsabilidad para lograr una gestión más efectiva y eficaz de los recursos con los que se cuentan, mediante una estricta y aplicada austeridad, como ya lo han mencionado algunos estados en la sesión de hoy. Una austeridad que en muchos casos no ha sido evidente. Con la actualización de la metodología de cuotas, el aporte de Costa Rica aumenta para el año 2024 y el año 2025 un 24%. Si aceptáramos el escenario propuesto por la presidencia de la CAP, conocido como el escenario 2C actualizado, que cuenta con el respaldo de algunos estados, nuestra cuota aumentaría no de un 24%, sino a un 35.5%. Por esta razón, tenemos que ser realistas y no asumir compromisos que impliquen un mayor estrés a las arcas del Estado. El argumento sobre la necesidad de aumentar las cuotas y de subir el techo presupuestario pierde validez sin un plan para racionalizar los costos, disminuir gastos innecesarios, ahorrar, buscar un mejor uso de los bienes inmuebles, identificar cuándo es productivo usar el teletrabajo y cuándo no lo es, urgir un regreso a la presencialidad, entre otras cosas. Se debe abordar la crisis financiera de una manera integral y esto es un trabajo de todos, tanto de la membresía como de la Secretaría General. Costa Rica hace un llamado a la cordialidad, al trabajo en equipo, al consenso, a la corresponsabilidad. La OEA somos todos, una organización que todos valoramos, por favor que quede claro eso, que todos respetamos y le otorgamos un gran valor al trabajo que realiza la organización y su recurso humano, quiero subrayarlo. Instamos a continuar fortaleciendo la transparencia y los mecanismos para la rendición de cuentas, elementos básicos e indispensables para tomar decisiones informadas que promuevan el ahorro y permitan la sostenibilidad de los programas. No son pocos los retos administrativos y financieros a los que nos enfrentamos. Reiteramos que no habrán cuotas ni gastos de ejecución presupuestaria suficientes si no se abordan dichos retos de una manera integral. Por este motivo, nuestro país apoya un escenario de mínimo aumento, nuestro escenario más realista. Costa Rica tiene la confianza de que los Estados miembros, junto con la Secretaría, en todas sus áreas, podremos encontrar medidas, ajustes y reformas que mitiguen la presión financiera que nos aqueja. Muchísimas gracias, señor presidente.
A ti, Alejandra. La representación de Canadá tiene la palabra.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good morning to distinguished secretaries, ambassadors, and colleagues. It is a beautiful day to discuss the budget outside, so it is nice to be here. And we wanted to take a moment to clarify Canada's position and provide some context at this time, given that we have paid for this meeting and we believe it is useful. While not as glamorous as our other positions on human rights and gender equality and democratic governance, one of our very, very overarching foreign policy priorities is strengthening the rules-based international order. And we view the OAS as an important part of the multilateral architecture. I think the ambassador of Costa Rica just said that the OAS is an important piece of this system, and we fully agree. As such, as many of you know, Canada has prioritized institutional strengthening and management modernization at the OAS for many years. We have been an active participant at CAP to champion reforms and support best practices. We have made much work together, but of course, we still have a ways to go. One of those efforts that was guided by Argentina as our CAP chair was to align the budget decision with our General Assembly. As member states, we all agreed that it is important for our ministers' discussions about policy priorities and mandates to be underpinned by realistic financial information. We all agreed that it does not make sense for our ministers to come together and sit at a table to discuss and agree to new mandates that have no basis in financial reality. So every member state around this table worked double duty to align the budget decision with the General Assembly in June. And so, Canada believes it is critical that we continue to pursue best practices, this best practice in particular, to ensure that our ministers' discussions are informed by financial considerations. We do not wish to backslide on this hard-fought progress that we have made. So on the budget discussion itself this year, we are optimistic that we're making progress. We are. It might not seem it, but we are. We agree, Chair, with your suggestion that if by next week we do not have a decision, that perhaps we do not need to meet in person. However, we think that we need to keep the pressure on. We need deadlines in order for us to focus and do the work and task ahead. Canada will, of course, work in good faith to that end. At the last PC, we very clearly heard, particularly from the Ambassador of Chile, that due to domestic financial constraints, many member states could not justify to their capitals or taxpayers the percentage level of increase that was being proposed. It was unreasonable, as many economies are just now getting back on their feet due to the post-COVID pandemic recovery. These delegations, we heard say that they could not support moving a penny beyond what was proposed in Scenario 1, a frozen budget level of $84.3 million. This was difficult for other delegations who believe that after 6 years of consistent cuts to the organization, we are down to the bone. However, what we do best at the OAS is work together to find solutions and creative compromises. In this vein, a brand new colleague at the CAP from the U.S. delegation came forward and put forward what we believe is in fact a highly innovative proposal. They tabled a proposal that, as we all know, enables both sides of the argument to win. By using a minimal credit from the ICR fund, member states can pay precisely what they stated was their maximum amount option in number 1. On the other hand, it makes delegations like Canada happy because it enables us to meet our financial obligations due to inflation. Is it a perfect solution? Absolutely not. Does Canada love using the ICR reserve, which is in large part funded by a credit from our voluntary contributions, to offset member state payments of quota? No. But we are willing to hold our nose and go forward in consensus for the greater good. We had useful, intensive, informal meetings on this topic all week. And it has become clear that for a number of delegations, it is not just about paying option 1 budget level. It is also about finding savings. Our position on this as Canada should be well known. We have led the charge for years on transparency, accountability, and financial prudence. We have upheld a ZNG policy and been involved in many years of OAS budget cuts. We are deeply skeptical about further cuts at this time. In the absence of negotiated policy and programming priorities, say for example on real estate, on national offices, on organizational restructuring, which we have all said will be covered in an external independent review for recommendations and guidance, and we strongly support, it is our view that savings are going to be hard to find. However, Canada welcomes and encourages those delegations who believe that consensus-based cuts and savings are possible to find at the OAS at this time to please put a proposal in writing on the table as soon as possible for us all to review. We are nearly there. This would be the final step. And we have been working on this issue for 3 months. We hope that this final extension, Chair, will get us over the line to bridge the gaps and reach consensus. As always, Canada will engage constructively in support of an effective, strong, and resilient OAS. So let's continue to set together next week and get this job done by next Friday. Thank you very much, Chair.
Muy bien. Por suerte hoy es el Día de Paraguay, ¿eh? No es poca cosa festejarlo con usted, mi querido amigo. Así que damos cuenta de esto, que probablemente sea la mejor noticia de la jornada a esta altura del campeonato. Bien, lo segundo es ir cerrando la sesión, pero pido por favor con el talante que esta humilde presidencia solicita. Si dentro de 7 días estamos de vuelta en el loop, lo que hacemos es no convocarnos de vuelta para eternizar el debate y decirnos lo que nos estamos diciendo, sino trabajarlo en la órbita de la comisión. Si les parece bien, damos por levantada la sesión. Gracias.